these small sort of, I would call them battle, they can't fight the war. That is, we have seen them. The recent report, I think about 2-3 days back, which I read, that the American they will all along being telling lies to
Yes,
the world.
all the governments
The
consistently
60%
were lying to the people of United States of America.
So they were telling their own people, they were, they were lying.
And it was reported in New York Times.
In New York Times, 60% area was even controlled at that time, and even it is controlled. Maybe it is more than by these, I would call them Afghan. So if with 200,000 troops, 150,000, the American troops and 50,000 the NATO troops, with 200,000, if they could not control more than 40%, how the hell they are going to control the same Afghanistan, the same Afghan with only 10,000 troops? So
not possible at all.
Doesn't make sense. They are there. They want to stay. But let's see, and in the what is happening in the past. That's why all these restrictions and things which they try to impose. And again,
and it's not only on China; it's on Russia, Turkey, Pakistan, Iran,
everyone,
Africa.
They are doing it, but now again we can see they are. It is a nation. If you lie down and you take whatever they want to dictate. If you take it as a yes man, well, they will come. Naturally, everybody would like to do that. But if you show and you tell them that sorry, enough is enough, whatever we have done.
I think it's high time that the regional alignments. I mean, they need to be fixed, and according to the interests and objectives, they should be realigned. But you must have a very important point. That is, do you believe that it is because of the economic growth and that model and that approach of the Chinese? That is the reason that they have become an adversary to the Americans. Is that the only reason? Or do you think China is going to challenge the United States of America at every front now? Forget about South China Sea issue or the design to look after the Pacific in general, because control of the Pacific is also very important. The west side of the United States of America, California, all the way to the side, and the Chinese, the gateway so-called to the Pacific. Yes.
Well, Faisal sir, what I have, seen things is that China was a civilizational state. They always looked inward. It was an introvert approach. Now, the China is no more a civilizational state. China wants to expand. They have a vision. And they, if you just look at the lexicon, or if you just look at the vocabulary the Chinese are sharing with the world, and the vocabulary is that let's have a shared destiny. On the other hand, the Americans have the vocabulary like shared values. Now, shared destiny and shared values. Shared values is about having democracy, having human rights, having free speech, where shared destiny is about reaching to the point where we all have an economic strength. So it's
win-win situation for everyone.
They call it as a comprehensive strength. They call it as a comprehensive strength. So if all will be powerful, that will be good for us. That will be good for the China. That will be good for everyone. So common security, comprehensive strength. This is what the Chinese are talking about. But definitely the Americans have realized that behind this common strength and behind this common security and behind this shared destiny, there are definitely the political goals. And that was the end of the President Obama's first tenure, when the Americans thought that Asia Pacific will be the pivot for the next century. So they believe, even the Hillary Clinton at that time, she was the Secretary of State, and she wrote a very famous piece for Foreign Policy magazine. And she explained that the future of the United States will not be decided in the mountains of Afghanistan or in the streets of Iraq. It will be decided in Asia, and the United States will be in the center of the action.
That was the time when they declared the future is all about Asia.
So they look at that, how Chinese are expanding, and we have seen that how BRI has come, and looking at the policies of the Democrats. I think the Republicans are looking Asia Pacific from the same lens, the way the Democrats were looking. So they look that it is China which is expanding, so we have to be at China's backyard. That is where the Chinese understand, and we call it as a, there's a cooperation going on, but at the same time there is competition between both the countries. We call it as a cooptation. So the cooptation between them is going on. There's a cooperation, there's a competition, but as we have seen, Trump was in China, he met with them and he understands that we have to engage with the Chinese. But the Chinese understand that we need not to annoy anyone. We need to have even Indians on board. We need to have Pakistan on board. We need to have everyone on board, and let's make an economic model. Let's have this shared destiny. Let's engage everyone, and then we will have certain political goals if we have to have at some later stage. But since Americans, they are great powers and they understand. Even I remember Professor Joseph Nye used to say that China cannot rise peacefully. But the Chinese we have to rise peacefully. So that is, I think, the Chinese are coming with a new model, and that model is engaging everyone. So
is it in the direct conflict, like when it comes to the American interest, sir?
I think, for example, China is the only country, China will be the only great power that is rising in the times of globalization. Before the great powers which have got a position there, it was before the globalization. So the Chinese are getting maximum benefits out of globalization. So you have to engage in today's world order. And remember one thing, Faisal Saab, Chinese have understood one thing. If you want to have a power, you have to rise from the same power corridors. So for example, if there is an institutional global order, if there are financial institutions, so the Chinese are building parallel financial institutions. It is, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that will work as comparison to IMF.
They're talking about replacing dollar with so many other currencies. If you remember, I'm not exactly sure about the year, but they, in fact, shifted, or maybe they just converted a certain amount of their forex reserves from US dollar to euro.
Yes.
And you remember what happened to dollar at that time?
Yes. It was crumbling. So I think this is where they understand that the Chinese understand that we need to cooperate. We just need to work with the Americans, and they want to engage everyone. The best strategy is to engage everyone, and let's not confront anyone. Let's not think that we have any security goals. Even with the Afghanistan, they have just the economic goals. So I think the Americans understand those designs, and what they want is to engage with the Chinese because they're not offensive. They are not offensive. They don't want to, there is no brawl. So what I was talking earlier, that it is an institutional hegemony and there is an institutional response to that institutional hegemony. So if the Chinese why this BRICS is getting so important? This is because the Chinese believe that let's have all these countries which are scattered. It is not a common Europe. It is a different political BRICS. India, Brazil, South Africa, it's China and Russia. They have all different political models, but let's have that particular institutions through which...
One quick comment, sir, because you've raised a very important point. I mean, if you look at B for Brazil, R for Russia, I for India, then you have C for China, and you have S for South Africa. Yeah. And there was another model that was meant, if you remember. Now look at these countries. Interestingly, look, because it is all about economy at the end of the day. So, Chima Saab, it was Mexico in mint, it was Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. Now see what is happening with these four countries.
But
so they have realized that if these economic blocs they get together, things would be really a problem.
But I remember, among these countries, Russia is a great power, member of the Security Council.
No, I'm talking about the number two, the second bracket.
Yes.
Mexico, we all know what is happening to Mexico. We all know, as far as Indonesia is concerned, I mean, still Islamic rebels are there are issues, there are problems. Nigeria, despite the amount of resources they have, look at the level of corruption, and they've been, in a turmoil for such a long time. And look at Turkey. Sanctions, Muslim economic country growing at such a pace.
But
certainly,
why this BRICS, and they are hopeful because they believe that that is the largest chunk of the population. India and China, what they call it is a gravity model of the trade, that you have to trade with the countries which are most closer to you and the market that is more accessible to you. For example, for Pakistan, if we just call it as a gravity model of trade, India and China, despite everything else, they are the countries where we should do the best of the trade.
Because when you talk about these countries, these are primarily those countries, which have got tremendous economic growth. But look at SCO, sir. Now, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the common factors: Russia, India, China, 3 nuclear states, along with Pakistan, fourth. Yes. Correct, sir? And then your Central Asian states, and then you have Iran. But you do not have Afghanistan as a permanent member, right, sir? So the point is that, don't you think SCO is again another very important organization that can challenge the United States of America, despite the fact that the Indians are there, because it's about the region. So that is going to be a problem for the Americans in the longer run, sir.
It will.
Because Indians are trying to keep a very good balance, sir. The equilibrium is so perfect. They are balancing Russia, they're balancing the British, the Iranians, Saudis, Americans, Chinese, you name it, and I think they're hats off to their foreign policy.
Yes.
Sir.
I am glad that we have entered into very interesting discussion on this very important topic. Let me bring one or two more points in this discussion,
Sure.
so that we have a broader canvas and picture to understand the whole reality what is emerging around us. Number one, the US unipolarity movement has already come to an end in 2003.
And why? How can we say that, right, sir?
We can say
Why is
that
so?
once the Soviet Union was disintegrated, for very short span of time, starting from 1992 till 2003, America was having that unipolar moment as a hyper superpower. From 2003 onward, that things started changing. Let me put it like this. It was simultaneously China emerging as a super economic power, and it was resurgence of the Soviet Union simultaneously. And at the same time, when we look at a bigger picture in 2008, in the wake of this financial crisis in Europe and America, things started getting worsening. And then we started talking about Chinese approach to look at the world in purely economic terms.
Correct.
Knowing that what happened in the last 20 odd years and the way United States of America tried to control things in Afghanistan, which miserably failed. The longest war in American history is in Afghanistan, and I can safely say it is going to be the second Vietnam. And then, of course, look
So
what
the problem is in Vietnam, about 56,000 US soldiers were killed. And when those bodies went back, there was a problem. Now, have you ever seen a single body going to United States of America? Because there's a complete blackout regarding media. So they are there to stay, sir.
I am talking about the implications of this continuous stay of the Americans
Sir,
in
they have
this
spent
region.
$1 trillion so
$3
far.
trillion US dollar in just one war in Afghanistan, and more than 13 to 15 trillion US dollar in other wars in the region, whether it was Iraq or Syria or 67 conflicts.
But they are getting those wars financed by NATO, and they've asked all the NATO countries to contribute at least 4% of their GDP for the pool of NATO, sir. And interestingly, if they're giving 4%, even countries like who are in miserable conditions, like Greece for that matter, they have to buy weapons worth $2 billion from the Americans. And interestingly, around 70 to 75% of the total budget of NATO is used, or rather consumed, by the Americans for their own interest.
Let me put it in a perspective. Czech Republic was my last posting, and I was looking at the way the United States of America was coming non-stop to European countries, NATO allies, asking them to bring their GDP at least to 2% for sharing to NATO funding. And could you believe that there were hardly 5-6 countries who were coming to that level of 2% of their GDP, whereas the rest were somewhere close to 1% or 1.5%. This is still a far cry for the United States of America to motivate NATO allies to come up to that level where they can even contribute 2% of their GDP to NATO defense funding. This is point number one. And then, of course, the way China is emerging everywhere, it is a non-stop process, and they are very clear in their direction: strategic cooperative partnerships, win-win cooperation, and engagement with the world in economic terms. This point we cannot simply wish away. Let me take also to another point, the way Donald Trump came to power in 2016, and subsequently in the sheer feel of their power politics and their own views on handling the world affairs. And in their arrogance, they started dictating the world, and which is not coming to, of course, a point. Now, look what happened in G7 summit in Ottawa. What happened in NATO summit in Brussels? What happened with all these trade wars which United States is now launching or waging against even his own allies? What happened when United States of America withdrew from this TPP? What happened with the United States of America also stopped negotiations on TTIP? And what happened when United States of America unilaterally withdrew from Iran nuclear deal?
P5+1
All these were eye openers for the world. And the best allies of United States of America, including NATO and European Union, they are really concerned and worried about the futuristic
So it has
approach
destroyed their credibility.
of Donald Trump, who has become so antagonistic in his approach. He's so-
Backing out from this climate summit also, whatever the declaration was, I mean, that is something so important.
So-
they're the largest contribution of these missions here in the air, and look what they've done to this, I would say, to our motherland. But unfortunately,
And now, after putting that longest war in America's history in Afghanistan, America has come to perhaps a realization to start negotiations, direct negotiations with the Taliban. And they are talking about even to Pakistan and India and others to have a political negotiated settlement in Afghanistan. I am absolutely clear that
sir, it seems that they do not have a clear-cut design.
Right.
They seem to be very confused. They want to stay, that they want to move out. They want to spend, yet they are saying that, let's sort of finance this war from other sources like drugs for that matter, and so on and so forth. So I'll just come back, sir. One quick important, another question which was popping in my mind was about the Americans. That they've always been looking at engaging Pakistan, engaging India, engaging China. But don't you think that now, for some interesting reason, that the Americans, they've been engaged in Afghanistan, sir? Maybe by the Russians, because they have got, they believe that ISIS, or IS, let's suppose this way, that is, or the rebels, they have been supported by the Americans, financed by them, equipped by them, and then they are unleashed on countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. At the same time, Taliban, they do not have any design beyond the borders of Afghanistan. And they are considered as terrorists, though they are the freedom fighters. They want the Americans or the foreign troops to be out. Now, they are there, and they've been projected or they've been sort of, shown as if they are the bad people. Though you understand what the real issue
sir.
is.
Yes.
But sir, the media is so strong, and otherwise, when you look at the other American strengths, I would say, they're really capitalizing well on that. But don't you think, sir, now the Russians, especially under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, and the Chinese under the leadership of great Xi Jinping, along with the, I would say, Iranian as well, because there is also a part of that group now, their prime concern, and all these countries which were part of Cento-Cito, Pakistan, then Iran, and all the way to Turkey. Now, those were the blue-eyed boys, and they were like always loved by the Americans. Certainly, they're putting sanctions on Turkey, Iran, we all know, and Pakistan now. Things are changing, or rather have changed, sir.
Well, I would say that, as you very rightly put it, actually they don't know what they should do and what they are doing.
Yes.
They want to exactly